So here we are. We have a bit of time together, and the focus for this morning and the first part of the afternoon is on practice, and then we'll go into more attention to the Heart Sutra and relating that to Dzogchen. Behind me you can see a painting of the Mandala of Kalachakra. A mandala represents a whole world. It means everything you need is inside this mandala or this particular construction. Because the basic focus in Buddhism is to find the wholeness of our experience. And the main block to the experience of wholeness is fragmentation and dispersal. That is to say, we get carried away by thoughts, by feelings, memories of the past, plans for the future, and our energy gets spread out. We leave bits of ourselves in various places which have an importance. We leave bits of ourselves in various people who have importance to us, parents, lovers, and so on. And on the one level, this brings a lot of richness into our life, but it also means that we are all over the place. So without renouncing the richness of our experience, the focus is on how to arrive in a state where everything is together. That everything can be included just as it is without fragmentation. So the first part of that is to practice gathering ourselves together in terms of our attention. So we begin with some basic shine or shamatha practice, which means staying peacefully. That is to say, not being disturbed. Often we don't know that we're disturbed because we enjoy disturbance. Many people are very frightened of boredom. They would rather have something than nothing. And as long as something is going on, there's a sense that this affirms my identity as who I am. Even if you have problems and worries, they act as a kind of reassuring pressure which returns me to my established sense of who I am. So the practice of shine is a kind of antidote to this. That there are some seats there also, there, wherever you like. Welcome. So in the shine practice, we are going to focus on the flow of the breath at the nostrils. The breath is coming in and going out. There's nothing to hold on to, so it has the advantage that we have a dynamic focus. It's an encouragement to be with the flow of experience, but without elaborating it. There is nothing to do with the breath except to be there with it. Nothing to think about, nothing to consider or be concerned about or hopeful about. It's just very neutral. Then, of course, we get caught up in thoughts, feelings. There's maybe some space over there. Wherever. Do your feng shui. We get caught up in various thoughts which seem meaningful to us. And they are meaningful in terms of developing and maintaining the structures of daily life. But they're not so helpful in the meditation. So meditation is quite challenging because it's saying that the basic important factors of our life have situational relevance, not intrinsic relevance. It's important to know where your car keys are. It's important to know what you'll be doing on Monday next week when you maybe go back to work and you've got things to do. It's important to know whether you've got some butter in the fridge and whether you need to buy it on the way home. These are very important for the maintenance of life. But in terms of meditation, they're not important. But we keep the importance of daily life by turning it into an absolute. Oh no, I forgot the butter. Shit, now the shops are closed. Oh God. These things become very, very important in life. This is terrible. Not in the least terrible, but in terms of the frame of reference, the object is missing, and now you have some doubts about your own mind. Why don't I remember these things? And this is the eternal massaging of the ego to say, your point of view, your criteria, very important. How I experience my life, this is the central fact. But of course, as we know, the things which we have been concerned about at the various stages of our lives have changed. The concerns of childhood pass away when you become a young adult, and then the concerns of young adulthood pass away as you get older. And so the contents which are being invested with an absolute importance are unreliable. Their value is our investment in them. They are not intrinsically valuable. So in the practice, when we are focusing on the breath, we are de facto taking the energy back from the thought, from the feeling. When we get caught in a thought, that's not due to the power of the thought, it's due to the power which we have given to the thought. The thought doesn't have intrinsic power. The feeling doesn't have intrinsic power. We give that power. So, although it's quite a simple practice, it has a lot of profundity in it, because it's not only a way of not being caught up in thoughts, but energetically it's allowing the return of the energy into the direct channel of awareness, so that our energy is not leaking out into these phenomena. And this allows the psychosomatic structure of the energy channels, the nadis, and the movement of prana to settle. It gathers together in the central line, because everything can vanish, but we're just here. Nothing is more relevant than the movement of the breath and our attention on it. So this is a practice within the family of renunciation. That is to say, it's on the level of the Buddha's first teaching, which he gave in the deer park in Sarnath. It's concerned with separating out the destructions and turbulence of samsara so that the mind finds peace. So we do this for some time, sitting in a comfortable way, allowing your skeleton to carry your weight. And breathing easily through the diaphragm. Chin is slightly down. The gaze of the eyes is down the line of the nose. The eyes are not staring, but just slightly open. The tongue is turned up onto the hard palate. The shoulders are open and relaxed, with the hands resting in the lap. Of course, we're sitting on the floor. Most of us are not sitting on the floor all the time. So if your body becomes painful, you can move your body. In some systems of practice, people are trying to disregard the messages of the body. And sometimes that can be useful, but sometimes it's not helpful. This is not a heroic path of struggling to overcome obstacles. It's a way of settling and being peaceful. So if you're sitting in pain and your body starts thinking, oh my God, I can't bear it, you should listen to your body. You can stretch your leg and then fold it back in again. Struggle is greatly overvalued. Sometimes there is a lesson that says, don't do this. The Russians invaded Afghanistan. They fought a war for many years and many people died. After some time, the Americans thought, we can do better than the Russians, so they invaded Afghanistan, and they didn't do very well. When the light is red, stop driving. Struggle is not a good idea. Unnecessary effort. The main teaching I got from Siya Lama was, take the easy path. Take the easy path. Because difficulty means something. Difficulty means something is not right. Cats take the easy path. They are quite relaxed. Dogs. So our practice is to move from dog to So, sitting in a comfortable way, we take up the intention, I'm going to focus on the flow of the breath, and if we find we're distracted, outside noises, inner thoughts and feelings, sensation and so on, just very gently bring your attention back onto the breath. It's not about blaming, not about struggle. If you get distracted again and again, just come back again and again. It doesn't mean anything except that you're getting distracted a lot. It doesn't mean you're a bad person or you can't meditate or you shouldn't do this. It just means today there's a lot of turbulence and so you have to come back again and again. If you go out sailing in a small boat and it's quite calm, there's nothing much to do. You have a gentle breeze, you hold the tiller and you set your way across the bay. But if it's a stormy day and the wind's blowing a lot and there are big waves, you have to move about a lot more. That's the same in the meditation. If you get distracted, you have to come back more. It doesn't mean anything except there's more wind blowing. Because this is a key point. Our tendency is to make interpretation, to elaborate some kind of story on top of what is happening. And once you do that, you feed into the generation of more and more narrative. And that's very unhelpful. So, in the simplest possible way, we come back to the breath. Any questions about that before we begin? Okay, so. In the complexity of our lives, all sorts of things are important for us. But when we have a crisis of some kind, we have to make more precise choices. So, for example, if you work in an institution, every now and then you do fire training. If there's a fire in the building, when you hear the bell, you should get up and immediately leave the building and not take anything with you. Then you think, oh, but my diary or my phone, this is part of me. No, you have to leave it. The fire warden is saying, why are you carrying that bag? You have to leave everything. It's the same on the aeroplane. If the plane lands on water, take your shoes off, go down the chute, don't take any of your possessions. So when we do this calming meditation, we see the desire to take our possessions with us. We see the desire to take the thought constructions, the feelings, which are the familiar accoutrement, the familiar possessions and supports that we have that maintain our ordinary sense of self. So of course this kind of practice is also a preparation for death, because at death we leave everything. We leave our money, we leave our friends, we leave our books, our projects, we leave our body. Everything is left behind. And a lot of meditation practice in the Tibetan tradition is concerned with the preparation for death. Because death means this is finished, something new is beginning. And on a micro level, that's the same moment by moment. The past is gone, now we're here. But if the past is not really gone because we're clinging on to the past, then the debris of our lives, the remnants and the traces of the past experience is imported into this moment, and we arrive already cluttered. And it's difficult to have a fresh beginning if you feel that in order for me to be me, I have to bring the past with me. So, well, this is quite a simple practice. If we really go into it, it is very profound, because it means letting go and releasing and relaxing into a simple focus. And this is enough. And all these other things are irrelevant. They become relevant because we make them so. The answer or the power or the meaning doesn't lie in the object, it lies in the mind. In all the different areas and levels of Buddhist teaching, it says the mind comes first. The mind is the most basic thing, because it's the mind which gives meaning and the mind which can let go of meaning. People meet and they say, I love you. And then after some time they say, I don't love you anymore. I'm leaving. So what was that? That is the mind. The mind gets intoxicated by someone, and then the mind has enough. The meaning was not in the other person. The feeling of love allows you to connect and appreciate the other person a bit. This is your own mental activity. Then after a while you get tired of the person. They annoy you, they disturb you. And so you want to get rid of them, as if they were the thing that was annoying you. But what is annoying you is the processes of your own mind. I thought you liked that. I thought we had a good time. Yeah, maybe, but anyway. How does that come about? Because the mind is the great source of creativity. The mind allows things to blossom and then to collapse. So we have the cycle of the seasons. Now we're in spring, we see all this new hope in nature, the buds coming out, the fresh leaves. It looks very exciting. Then we go through summer, and then in the autumn it starts to close down again. These are the cycles also of our interests and our desires. We are unreliable. The world is unreliable. That's why we suffer. Unreliable people in an unreliable environment. We look for something to hang on to, and we hang on to things which are unreliable. They change. Our health changes. Sometimes we're able to run around, other times we're sick. Our job changes. We love doing something, and then we start not to like it so much. Somehow the glow, the shine, the libidinal cathexis starts to collapse, and not very interested anymore. These are usually not volitional choices. We just find ourselves in a situation where the shininess seems to vanish. You can see that with children, with their toys. Something that was very important and that was always being carried around is then left in the rain. Don't you want that? No, now I have something new. So we see the mind investing and divesting all the time, like waves in the oceans, rising and falling, rising and falling. So we had the central question in Buddhism: what can we take refuge in? Can we take refuge in our thoughts? But when we start to meditate, we see how unreliable our thoughts are. Can we take refuge in our feelings, in the sensations in our body? All of these are changing. And when we try to cling on to something which is fundamentally impermanent, we are going to be cheated. Not because there was something wrong with the object, but because we didn't want to know what the real nature of the object was. Everything shows its impermanence. And yet we want things to be permanent. This is not that something's wrong out there. This is us trying to make something which is inherently, of its own nature, unreliable, impermanent, ever-changing. We are trying to make it stable. If we could stay with the changing flow of experience and just be present with it, without putting the extra burden, you should always be reliable, you should always be the same, we would have much more happiness. We set the object up to betray ourselves because we imagine it will be the same. So when I was working in the hospital, at first I really enjoyed it. We had a very friendly professor who managed to secure lots of resources. We had research developing. Then the professor retired, the head of research retired, the new managers came in with a new agenda, they blocked the money that we had. The building was the same, but the feeling tone was completely different. The building, which had been the host of spring and summer, was now getting a bit chilly. And so going into work, having the same job title, having many of the tasks the same, started to feel not very pleasant. And I said, this is terrible. But why was there the expectation that it would be the same? This was from me. Years and years and years of reading about impermanence, and yet expecting that somehow it would be the same. So why did I want it to be permanent? Because I liked one way that it was. That way wasn't the clinic, it was the presence of certain people. And they were there due to causes and conditions, their contracts, their age, their experience, the background amount of money that was being supplied for a public health clinic, and so on. The economy changes. The government department that's in charge of health changed its orientation. The interest in particular kinds of psychotherapy changed. More money was going into CBT and so on. And a situation that arose due to causes and circumstances was different. I can know this theoretically, but I wanted it to be the same because I liked it. I was like a little squirrel. I wanted to make a nice nest and take a little bit of hair from here and some leaves and snuggle down for the winter. This is how we cheat ourselves. That the desire for stability and security makes us stupid because it blocks the actual phenomenology that things are always changing. Appearances are rising and passing, emotions are rising and passing, health is changing. This is a changing, moving world. And in order to be at home in it, we have to be fresh. So the desire that a particular interpretation or a particular reading of the situation should be applicable on Friday just because it was applicable on Monday is a self-deception. Friday needs Friday's approach. Monday needs Monday's approach. Now, this highlights the difficulty of the relationship we have with our thought construction, with our conceptual elaboration. Because as we build up mental pictures and interpretations of situations, we invest time and energy into that construction. Although, functionally, actually, these are mere sandcastles. The tide of time is going to wash them away because we have invested our life energy, our hopes into them. We want them to be solid and stable. And so we cheat ourselves. And then we start to think, well, it's a burden. Why couldn't Monday's world be applicable on Friday? Because I know Monday's world. I lived all the way through Monday. Now it's Friday. It's the end of the week. I'm tired. Let's just do Monday again. But Friday is not Monday. And so the map that we have, the image that we have, is contrary to what's there. And this comes from the fundamental nature of ignorance, which is to believe that concepts tell the truth about the world. That concepts give us an accurate reading of how things are. And therefore, the palaces of concepts that we build up are going to provide us with reliable, repeatable ways of proceeding. When in fact, concepts are gestures into the moment. They are factors of participation. It's how we relate to what's there, rather than something that gives us a grasp onto, a handle onto a stable situation. The dynamic nature of our thoughts and feelings, if we open to it and allow it and trust it, means there will always be more thoughts. This is one of the things we try to do when we calm the mind. We find there are always thoughts. Thoughts don't end. Oh, so why don't we trust that on Friday we'll have Friday's thoughts? At the end of Monday, Monday is gone. Tuesday's thoughts will come, then Wednesday's. Each day provides its own thoughts, its own feelings and sensations. Is there any need to import? You can only import something you can get a handle on. The actuality of Monday is gone. Monday doesn't exist on Tuesday. But memories of Monday, ideas generated on Monday, can be transposed, it seems, across into Tuesday, as if one is continuing the same thing. And from the Buddhist point of view, this is the danger of reification and objectification. That is to say, we turn dynamic, unfolding processes of interaction into the illusion of solid substances, which can then be moved from one place to another, and therefore can be built on as if they were enduring. And from the Buddha's point of view, this is deceptive. We can stumble along in life building things up in this sort of way, but sooner or later, our constructs start to collapse. So the function of the meditation practice is to free ourselves from the habit of trying to grasp the ungraspable. Not so that we have nothing at all, but so that we can play with what is there. Because as soon as you grasp something, you have the joy of ownership and possession, but you also are imprisoned in that limited relationship. Because once you've got hold of something, it's got hold of you. And all the freedom that you had before, all the potential to do so many different things is now constrained by what you've got. So it's not about having nothing at all, but having an open, participatory, free potential which can relate to what's there. Which means seeing the environment and trusting ourselves. Not as a personal, historically developed potential, that is to say, a repertoire of skills and abilities I've built up through time. That's part of it. But we each have access to a much wider potential, the creativity of the mind, which is infinite. And the more we loosen up from our neurotic obsessions, our anxieties about who we are and how we are, imprisoned in the fantasy of a stable identity, we find that identification or playful connectivity has more and more potential. So that's really what we're on about. And in the next days we're going to look at some detail at the Heart Sutra, because the Heart Sutra is a text which speaks to the analysis of the unreliability of the building blocks out of which we create the illusion of a stable self and a stable world. So it's a very good way of carefully and precisely putting into questions the assumptions on which we build our familiar sense of self. Okay, shall we take a break here? And then we'll come back and do some more practice. Okay. So, one thing we might be helpful to consider is that things are the forgetfulness of your mind. So, we look around this room and we see lots of things. These things exist because you have forgotten who you are. So, the end. So we say, here is a lamp. We look at it, we recognize this kind of lamp. It has a base and a stem and the top, and light is coming out. So there is a lamp in that place. And we imagine, unless somebody moves it, the lamp will be there in the afternoon and tomorrow and so on. It is a thing which is existing in itself. This is our ordinary perception. So I can see and know that this lamp is there. It is a thing, and I am a subject who can know about the thing. Whether I know about it or not, it is there. It exists in and of itself. This is our ordinary way of thinking. From the Buddhist point of view, this thing we call the lamp is something which is revealed to us. We look in that direction and we see shape and color. We then start to organize the simple perception of shape and color into increasingly solidified identifications. So, according to the notion of the 5 heaps or the 5 skandhas, the 5 organizing principles that we'll be looking at in the Heart Sutra, having with the shape and the color, we start to think, I like it, I don't like it. And whether I like it or not is dependent on the qualities. That's a very ugly kind of lamp. So the feeling tone of like and not like is flipped over into being a reading, an accurate reading about the qualities inherent in the lamp. And then we develop our interpretive perception. We can have some thoughts about how it functions and its shape in relation to other shapes. In the Tibetan language, this is called dushe, which means the shaping of knowledge. That is to say, as I say lamp, my way of knowing starts to get organized around lampness. So if I'm looking at the lamp, I'm not thinking about horses. So a lot of the information which I have available to me about other objects in the world falls away, and what becomes foreground is the thoughts which are relevant to a lamp. So it now is becoming figural, not just in terms of hooking more of my attention to out there, but I am being organized by the lamp. Thoughts come to mind which relate to lampness. The lamp is shaping me just as I shape the lamp. That's a very interesting thing, isn't it? That we are called into being. We are formed by the kind of formations that we see out there. So, if you're in a workplace and you have a colleague who's, I don't know, very slow or lazy, your perception of their performance shapes you because you get pissed off. And how they are is how you are. So it's a two-way street. That is to say, we are implicated in the world. The world is not something out there. And this is the most fundamental Buddhist understanding. You can't exclude yourself from stuff, because actually stuff is experience. It's not self-existing. This lamp is coming into existence for you according to your particular interests and habits, formations, and so on. Someone might like the shape of this lamp and think about where they could get the lamp, and then they maybe see if there is a name on the bottom, and they can go to their local shop to try to get this. Other people won't. So our life and the lamp are coming into a conversation. Then the fourth aspect is a further set of associations which come around the lamp. And these are influenced by the second level, which was the feeling tone. Because most of the time, a lamp's a lamp. It's kind of neutral. We're not thinking about the aesthetics of it too much, especially if it's in a public place like this. It's not our home. If it was in our home, we would have more sensitivity to like and dislike. Here it's just some functional object. And therefore, the mental associations that form around the lamp are not so powerful. However, you might be concerned with electricity, and you might be wondering, well, what kind of bulb has it got in it? And you might be thinking, why is it on in the daytime? Don't you know that generating electricity involves all sorts of So that's a personal choice. Some people, the wheels will turn with that, and other people, they just look, oh yeah. So these associations bring us into whether this object is sticky for us or not. The stickiness of the object is paralleled by the stickiness of your mind. If you're not concerned with lights on during the day, it's smooth. And if you are, it's maybe annoying. And therefore you want to switch it off. Because it shouldn't be like that. Why are they doing that? Can't people see that this is ridiculous? Maybe we want to enjoy the ridiculousness. So once you start to observe your own mind, you're faced with the fact that you don't live in the same world as other people. what gets them going and what gets you going are different. And that's not just a sort of personal thing inside you. It truly is the way in which you experience the world. That these thoughts are not, as it were, added onto the object, but that the object is born for you through your participation. Now that's very different. It's not that there's a noun there and then you can apply your adjectives or your adverbs that will give you your particular relation to that thing. What this is suggesting is there is no thingness to this thing right from the very beginning. It is coming into existence for you in a way which has you implicated from the very beginning. Because you have no access to knowing what this is like if you don't look at it. That's an abstract notion. As soon as you engage with it, you're part of it. And the fifth level in terms of the skandhas is consciousness, which is a fully shaped apprehension, a kind of compounded or fabricated assessment of, yeah, I quite like that lamp. You come to a conclusion. That's what consciousness is. It's the process of arriving at conclusions. And of course, a conclusion looks like job done. It looks as if you've arrived someplace. We're all looking at the lamp. This is a lamp. We know where we are. The clarity of knowing that's a lamp helps us to think, and I'm me. Lamp, me. Win-win situation. So the more the world stays in its own place, the more comfortable we are. The more turbulence there is, the more people become anxious. And we see politically there's some rise of right-wing political parties. Right-wing political parties say, we have the truth. People who believe the truth which we have are good. People who disagree with us are bad. The world is better off when the bad people are removed. This is what is happening with ISIS in the Middle East. That they have a dogmatic agenda that says, we are the saved, everyone else is damned, and the murder of Christians and Jews and false Muslims like Shias, Ahmadiyya and so on is a blessing. Makes the world very simple because there is a definite truth. You start with a proposition and the implications of holding that proposition are then very, very clear. Whereas once you start valuing difference and see that there are different kind of people in the world, you're then faced with the fact that everything you believe, because it's not entirely shared by other people, is relative to your situation. So some of you may be familiar with the Mahayana view of the two truths. You have relative truth and absolute truth. Relative truth means whatever is generated by dualistic thought processes. All the ordinary identifications that we have about our gender, our nationality, our likes, our political views, and so on, these are all thoughts which stand in relation to other thoughts. They appear to be true contextually. Because I grew up in this place, in this kind of family, at this particular period of time, I like this kind of music, I eat this kind of food, and so on. So there is a historical process of selection and formation which leads me to be like this. Had my family been different, had I left school early and gone to a factory and not stayed on and gone to university, or whatever our individual story is, the pathway of my life would be different. I would probably wear different clothes, not have a different hairstyle, and so on and so forth. So everything about me is me, undeniably so. This is my shape. But it's not an intrinsic or eternal or fundamentally reliable truth, because it's a construct from causes and conditions. On the other hand, there is an absolute truth, and the absolute truth is emptiness, the ungraspability of all phenomena, which is linked to the ungraspability of the mind, that the mind is infinite awareness without fixed content, but always available to illuminate whatever is arising. So when you come across a political system like ISIS, you see that what they have done is to take a relative proposition, our particular reading of Islam, and make it absolute. So from the Buddhist point of view, this is a really big mistake. Inside the relative world, everything is relative, which is why we should be collaborative with other people and thoughtful and not be evangelical, because knocking on someone's door and say, I want to bring you the good news of emptiness. Oh, what is that? Actually, I can't say. So why did you knock on my fucking door? I'm watching the telly. Buddhism is not evangelical in that way, because you have to have a kind of taste for it. It takes your fancy for whatever reason, karmic, cultural. You find yourself drawn towards a particular kind of curiosity. But it's not a truth to be put out there as true, because actually, when we study dharma, we're studying methods. And each of these methods acts as a kind of mental osteopath. It's loosening up the locked structures of the spine and shifting you around so that you see more and you see differently. And then you really think, wow, the ground that I stand on is not intrinsically true. All that I believe about myself, all that I think of as vitally important, is just sandcastles. It has no inherent truth. And the more we let go of these propositions as truths, the more we're able to activate them as methods of compassion. So what we have here is wisdom is a kind of silence. Wisdom is the open, empty mind, and everything else is compassion. It's relational. And relational means relating to the other as they are, not trying to convert the other into my idea of how they should be, but rather me opening up my flexibility, creativity, potential in order to find better and better ways of approximating to the possibility of co-emergence, of synergy, of having a harmonic movement with the other person. So it's not about control, it's not about having power over others, nor is it about being at the mercy of others, but about a real collaboration. So that's a very big difference. It's not dogmatic. Western thought, including the ancient Greek thought, moves in the direction of the logos, the word, which is the idea, which is the fundamental guarantor. And Christian ideas, particularly through Aquinas, follow the logos very much, about clarity, about church doctrine, and understanding the true account of how things are as set out in words, is the guarantor of salvation. Buddhism takes a very different view. From the Buddhist point of view, the logos is ignorance. So the highest is now not good news at all. Once you get into taking the idea as true, you start investing the idea with more and more importance, and it's very difficult then to observe what it is. When we sit quietly and allow our mind to be itself, we find every idea vanishes. Good ideas come and go. Bad ideas come and go. Happy ideas, sad ideas. So many things arise and pass. No fixed idea comes. Which is why in Buddhism the path is through experience. Because when you experience, the content of my mind is always changing. And you know that because that's what you see every time you look. You don't have a dogmatic understanding. You're just in touch with how it is. It's non-propositional. But it's also ungraspable. And that's where what we might call the ego formation becomes problematic, because the ego wants something to grasp. And so we make propositions. We hold on to the propositions. The history of Buddhism is full of conflicts. Tibetan Buddhism is redolent in wars, poisonings, backstabbings, malignings, sorcery, and so on. Why? How is it that good people do bad things? Well, maybe they're not good people, but they're the Lama. How could the Lama do bad things? Quite easily. Why? Because being a Lama is not a kind of ring-fenced arena of the mind in which bad thoughts can't get in. Bad thoughts go in everywhere. Lamas are better at not having a back door, so the bad thoughts go out pretty quickly before they cause too much trouble. But the idea that some people exist who never have a bad thought, I mean, how could you tell them a joke? Most jokes involve pissing on someone somewhere. So that's the thing, isn't it? The richness and complexity of life, this is what we have. And once you start trying to slice this into good, bad, right, wrong, this is called duality. But the Dalai Lama is wonderful. It's really wonderful. Maybe, not necessarily. There's gossip. Should we listen to gossip? Yes. The main yidam for everyone should be Dumbo, very big ears. Because gossip helps to deconstruct the fantasy, good people, bad people. There's no such thing. Sometimes the Dalai Lama looks a bit troubled. The Dalai Lama made many decisions politically about what to do with Tibet. And then afterwards he had some regret. He's spoken publicly about his regret. Maybe I got it wrong. Maybe I made the wrong decision. We can understand that. The idea that there is some kind of clarity free of confusion means here is nirvana and here is samsara. And yet all the higher tantra texts, Mahamudra and Dzogchen, say there is no separation between samsara and nirvana. The Buddha also shits. If you think shit is bad, then funny kind of Buddha. So this is very, very important, because you can completely distort your dharma life by misunderstanding the nature of idealizing projection. When we say the guru is perfect or Padmasambhava is perfect, This is a practice. This doesn't mean that you have thoroughly examined their CV and decided to employ them. Does anybody write an honest CV? No. It's editing. Editing. So, what you have in life is complexity. When Padmasambhava went to Tibet, we read that he, with his magical powers, controlled the local deities and established Buddhism. There were people in Tibet, quite a lot of people, who liked the local gods, who had their local shrines and who they felt these were the real protectors of their family. And Padmasambhava came and put his big thumbprint on them. Do you think these people were happy? Dear Rinpoche, thank you for degrading my family god. I will always be grateful. No. And that's why you had, 150 years later, a backlash. But he was establishing Buddhism. And Buddhism, as we know, is very good. So why weren't they all humble and grateful? Because they weren't Buddhists. But they were offered the chance to be Buddhists and they didn't take it. They must be stupid, bad, ridiculous. How do you want to cut the cake of life? It's a rich, complex field with different ideas. The complexity of existence is irreducible, but it does not contradict the openness of the mind. The mind is space and can tolerate a great deal of complexity. The ego is small and doesn't like complexity. So when we are saying this is good, this is bad, but surely these high lamas are perfect, this is the voice of the anxious ego, which is seeking to establish the good here and the bad there. This is a practice. When we do Tantra, we exactly make use of that. We say, you are the perfect one, I am the one with all the problems, please bless me. And we make use of this to transform ourselves. But a practice is not a truth. Because what is the real truth? Shtum. It says it in the text. It's manifestly true. So we become deceived when we believe in things which are at odds with direct experience. And direct experience is ungraspable. So the whole purpose of the practice is to become lighter, more flexible, more responsive, so that we are moving in the evolving field as part of the field and not banging into it. Because when you bang into things, you get angry. So you see that often with small children. They fall over and they hurt themselves and then they're angry with the chair and they kick it away. It's not the chair that jumped up and hit them. They fell over. So blaming the object is a very simple, primitive defense, isn't it? You project the danger out onto the other. And you can project the good onto the other. So in the practice of Tantra, we say, Padmasambhava, you are completely perfect, you have no problem. I have all the imperfections. And this creates a dialectic, a Hegelian dialectic. So the hopeful thesis that I have Buddha nature and I am like you, but I don't feel like you. So the antithesis is I am oppositional to the Buddha nature. And by increasing that tension, you polarize these two positions, which allows the full power of the dialectic to shimmer, so that you then have the synthesis in which you merge into the deity, into emptiness, and you recognize the ground of both. That's how Tantra works. And in the autumn, we'll be looking at that in some detail if you're interested. So the basic point here is, whenever I am building these sandcastles, whenever I'm constructing images of what I believe to be true, it's not that I should stop doing it because it's bad, but from the point of view of meditation, I need to pay attention to this building. Construction is an activity. How do I do that? How do I lead myself astray? How do I make myself lost? This is the function of meditation. I follow the thoughts, thinking they're going to lead me somewhere good. In the course of my life, I have followed many, many thoughts. Where have they taken me? Here, there, all over the place. But I haven't found myself by following thoughts. So now I sit in the meditation to return to myself, and I follow the thoughts. I'm going looking where I know how to look, but it takes me into the darkness. I call the darkness light, and so the light stays in the dark. Why do we rely on thoughts? Because we're good at it. It's as simple as that. Why did we not just relax and open and stay in present awareness? Because we don't know how to do it. Because it's not something that you do. And if I do what I know how to do, I feel like me. And if I open into something I don't know how to do, I'm not sure what's going on. And at that moment, the self-referential anxiety comes up, and we flip back into the thought construction. And what I'm trying to highlight here is this is not a moral failing. It's not a sign that we're bad people because we do it. This is involves releasing the energy construct or the vibratory pattern, which is our self-referential sense of identity, so that we can allow the energy to flow more freely and we become what is required in the particular situation. Freeing ourselves from this retractive, concentrating, conceptual elaboration, the construction of ourselves moment by moment. There's a lot to be gained by letting go of your construct. There's something also to be lost. The Buddha says, suffering arises from ignorance and attachment. So, if we trust the Buddha, he says, letting go of your constructs will set you free from ignorance and attachment. But there is a transitional period in which you have a foot in both camps. But I want to get enlightened. And I can't get enlightened unless I'm me. But because you're you, you can't get enlightened. But I want to be enlightened. That's the problem. So the more you conceptualize yourself as something solid, reliable, and something which could be improved and developed and made wonderful and eternal, the investment in that acts as a block or an obstacle to relaxing and opening. And this is why in the meditation we observe the flow of thoughts, the flow of sensation and feeling, the flow of memories. And we see, oh, my sense of self is generated moment by moment by the transient configurations of these contents. It is not self-existing. So letting go of that which is not self-existing is not such a big problem. The thing I have to let go of is the grasping or the clinging to the illusion of a permanent self, even when I can see there is no permanent self. So you can have a kind of conceptual insight into the fact that there is no truly existing self. But it's the energetic formation, the contraction that wants there to be something definite, that is more difficult to release. Because that happens preconceptually. We've already tightened up. We're already into something. Which is why space is such an important notion in the practice of Dzogchen. That space allows the movement of energy through it without it causing any harm. And so you don't have to, as it were, kill yourself or annihilate yourself or stop existing. But rather you can enjoy the movement of yourself as energy patterning in space. So it's not either I really exist or there's nothing at all, an eternalism or a sort of nihilistic position. The two basic Buddhist extreme views is that we have form and emptiness. We have existence, that is to say, the being here-ness of ourselves moment by moment, and yet you can't grasp it. You don't know what you're going to be like in half an hour, or even in 5 minutes' time. You don't even know how you're going to be sitting. You might be falling over, crossing your arms, or scratching your head. You will show yourself to yourself, as you always have done. You can't hold on to some definition. And so this attachment, this grasping and retractive feeling is very important. And that retraction is very interesting. I don't know if as kids you ever played with chicken's feet that had been cut off, and you get the big tendon and you pull it and the claw goes in. It's very nice. The retraction is the grasping. So when you grasp something, you may feel you're going forward, but you're going back. You're tightening up when you get hold of something. And that's the really interesting thing, when you start to see how uptight you are, how tied in knots, how folded in. So when we start to look in detail at the Heart Sutra, we will see, looking at the conventional categories and our modern understandings, how we tighten the world and tighten our sense of self unnecessarily. Freedom is there, but we choose imprisonment because it's familiar. And of course it's reinforced by the media, by movies, novels. Everything is confirming that there are real entities. And it's difficult to be aware that this is untrue, because reliance on thoughts is the most common currency. Britain doesn't share the euro with the people in the Eurozone. We have the pound. But we do share reliance on thoughts. Everybody has reliance on thoughts. Every country you go to, you use reliance on thoughts. So you fly into an African country, in the airport you go to the little money changing place, you give them your euros and they give you their local currency. And you check the rate. How do you do that? By reliance on thoughts. This is a thought-constructed world. It's not that thoughts are wrong or bad, but relying on them as if they were true, as if they gave you an accurate perception of real solid things in the world. This is what Buddhism means by ignorance or delusion. There is life, color, shape, movement, sounds, and so on. Everything is here. But it's not here as something. It is form and emptiness, or clarity and emptiness, appearance and emptiness. And the reintegration, or the perception of the natural integration of these two, is what's called liberation. Because if we are forgetful of emptiness, or the space of the mind, all we have is stuff. And there's a lot of stuff. And because there's a lot of stuff, we're always trying to sort it out. What's important, what's not important. And we're constructing ourselves out of stuff. The way that we see the birds now, they're starting to pair up, they're singing to each other. And then you see them starting to build their nest, flying through the air with little twigs. And just as they build up that nest, we build up our world from what we have collected in the course of our life. And just as the storms in autumn can blow their nest down, life events destroy our little nests as well. Nesting is an activity. The nest is just a construct. Everything is a construct. It is there, but it has no essence, no intrinsic self-substance. This is the Buddha's teaching. Nothing at all, not strongly real, but experience. So that's what we aim for, and that's why this basic meditation practice of calming the mind is very important, because it's allowing us to detoxify from our habitual addiction to thought. Thought is our salvation. You spent many years in school being encouraged to think more clearly, to amass information and form it into particular shapes to get through an exam. And then you go into the workplace, and all your working life, that's what you're required to do. You're required to take up data, raw material, and formulate it according to your trained thought processing to come up with new patterns. That's how we spend our lives. All the work that we have done is irrelevant. When I was leaving the hospital, I had many filing cabinets, and I went through them, and I saw all these proposals I had put through to the head of department, and all these plans and schemas and the syllabus of various courses that I designed and ran. And they're gone. That is what work does. It produces things which have no relevance. They are relevant for a small period of time, and then they're irrelevant. They were important contextually, and when the context changes, they are irrelevant. This is really important, isn't it? Because we, being gorgeous human beings, want to put our heart and soul into what we do, but the projects that we are engaged with are not really worth it. So we put our heart and soul into these transitory formations, and then become upset when other extraneous factors, outside factors, cause the blocking of our plans or the collapsing of some whole proposal you had put up. This is the longing of the heart for connectivity being misplaced into the idea of creating value through projects. So what would the Buddhist reading of that be? Say, oh, the real project is may all sentient beings be happy. The Bodhisattva vow. If you put your heart and soul into the liberation of all beings, into developing wisdom and compassion, that is a project that nobody can destroy. Because even if it's a long road and it's difficult, it has an integrity to it. But the things you establish in the workplace are very, very vulnerable. If you think how many times Mrs. Merkel has changed her opinion about immigration, because she is a politician and she wants to survive. And that's what politicians do. We say, this is what we're going to do, we are absolutely committed to this. And then some new information comes in. Actually, we are really committed to that. I think you misunderstood what I was saying earlier. This is how they survive. This is self-deception. In the goal of constructing the fantasy, I'm a reliable person, trust me, vote for me, and yet because the world is shifting, I have to shift what I'm on about. These two can't be squared, which is why we're always disappointed in politicians, because they promise to do something they can't do. And we are the same. We promise to do things we can't do, because the field of experience changes. So if we do a little bit more of that meditation, focusing on the breath, and just allowing whatever is arising to come and go without interference. So we have a break for lunch now, and then some free time. And in that time, I would invite you, if you would like, to go outside. You can walk in the streets at first and look at the houses and the gardens, and then go off into the fields and the woods. Look at one of the houses with their nice garden. See how people have constructed that garden, whether you like it or you don't. And then imagine that you are a child of 4 looking at the garden. See how that it might be different. Then imagine that you are a bird hopping in the garden. What would be your interest? Maybe not the little funny dwarfs and creatures, plastic things people put in the garden, but worms. So you can see that for the people, in order to park their cars, they put down some stones or tarmac, and that this is very helpful for human beings. And for birds, it's deprivation of worms, sealing the earth over. Then imagine that you're a cat walking through the garden or crossing the road. Cats tend to run underneath cars to hide, because they're always a little bit wary. So as you go out in the fields, imagine being a horse, being a cow, and see how the world is different according to your embodiment. Because what we're wanting to do again and again is to put into question the assumptions that we have that the world is the way we take it to be. It's just like that out there. And if we see that we are located in a human body with our particular sense organs, usually privileging the visual over the sense of smell and so on, with all that we've learned in schools, our notions of culture, adaptation, all of this agenda comes into the moment of perception. And if you were in another kind of body, a cow or a fox, the world would look very different. So that is to say, you would be organizing the field of experience according to radically different criteria. And it's when we see that this is a participative world which unfolds according to the nature of our predilections, our embodiment and so on, that we're restoring the balance of the mind being a major participant on the disclosure of what's occurring. I think it's a very useful exercise. When you go into the forest, you see little bugs crawling on the ground and you imagine what that's like. They have no overview, they're just going from one twig to another, having a sense of what is disclosed to that creature, that is their world. And we standing so much taller, looking around and see something completely different. They don't have our interpretive concepts, and yet they're alive. From the Buddhist point of view, they're sentient beings, they have a mind, but that mind is being mediated by the very nature of their embodiment. And really having an in-depth experience of that can be very useful for helping us to put into question the seeming stability of the assumptions that we use to guarantee our familiar sense of self. So that would be the invitation. And also for those who are interested, at 3 o'clock, Jayachita could be doing some movement in the room above the dining room. Do you want to say briefly something about that?
Okay,
Just need to move it.
yeah, it's improvisation, so it's improvised movement, and what we'll be doing is moving either on our own or in pairs or in small groups, and we'll be exploring very much moving into the unknown, very much how our concept, how our ideas about who we are form in relationships or in the situations, and how we can let go of them again.
Great.
It's fun. Easy.
And that's very harmonious with what we're doing here. So that's great. And then we meet all together here at 4:15. Okay. So for the break, we were looking at the relative nature of our lived situation. And how each creature has particular orientation due to its species, and then within that it has its own particular history. So coming in the car, near here at the side of the road, you see these signs about deer perhaps crossing the road. Cars are very powerful, they go fast, they have a lot of weight. If they hit a deer, it's not good luck for the deer. Deer don't really understand about cars. There's a lot of roadkill with badgers, with foxes and so on, because it's very difficult for an animal to work out the speed of a car. Sometimes you see a dog stuck in traffic trying to work out how to get across. Through that we can see, we get this just the outer sense that animals' worlds are very different from ours. They're highly attuned to certain environments and completely incompetent in other environments. And that, of course, is in many ways true for ourselves. The great advantage from the Buddhist point of view of having a human birth is that it means we have the capacity to have a wide range of experiences, that we're not so driven by instinct, and we have a rational capacity to reflect on our experience. So by using our analytical intelligence, we can prepare the way for more direct experience of emptiness. So from the analytic point of view, emptiness, the main focus of the Heart Sutra, is approached through the idea of the absence of inherent self-nature, or true substance, or essence, or internal definition. Each of us sitting here feels like an individual. We turn, we look at the people around us and we think, well, I'm not you. And maybe I'm not even like you very much. So I'm me. And we're aware of having a kind of inside and outside. We know that things can go from the outside into the inside, and things go from the inside into the outside. But it does feel as if there is a separation between us and the world. So I'm sitting here in the room with you, and you're also sitting here, but we could stand up and we could go outside. So being here is just one of our many possibilities, and that gives us a sense of freedom and independence, which of course is true. However, if I get up, suddenly stand up, what next? Where will I go? I have to go somewhere. I can't go nowhere. I'm always somewhere. Always. I'd sleep in my bed, on the plane, on the bus, in the toilet. I'm always somewhere. There's always me and you, or me and this place, me and it. So although we have the thought or the mental experience, I am an individual, I am a part, that carries the delusional shadow of thinking, and the environment is just some added on extra. But the fact is, we are never apart from a context. And once we start to see this, there is no me. There is a me here, a me now, a me with you or with someone else, a me engaged in some activity. There is a co-emergence of the individual, which means the indivisible one, and the environment. And the very fact that we are always linked with an environment indicates that in fact we are quite divisible. There are hospitals where very kind people cut other people open. And the people who are cut open are usually quite grateful, because it's quite helpful. Our body can be cut open very easily. Even slicing the vegetables, you can take the skin off your finger. We breathe in and we breathe out. The air of the world comes into us and then we breathe out again. This is an interactive system. Where is the center of yourself? You breathe in, the air goes into your lungs, the oxygen is moved then into the blood, into the heart, which is pumping it out, then it's moving out into the cellular system, allowing so many processes to go on, and then it's going back again. We talk of the heart as being central, but the heart is basically part of a distribution system. All the organs are distribution systems. The body is a communicative system. So the bowels are communicating with the nervous system, communicating with the brain, and so on. Messages are happening all the time through the endocrine system. This body is communication. And through our senses, we're in communication with the world, and the world is communicating. So the lamp is on the floor, and the floor is linked with the walls, and the walls go into the foundations, and the foundations are linked with the earth, which are linked with the road, which leads to the next village, which leads to the city, and so on. This is one vast interconnected system within which we participate. We are already inside it. We don't go from the outside into it. So what is then our autonomy, our individuality? This is an illusion. So this general idea, which we find in all the Buddhist schools, of dependent origination, pratichet samutpada, Tibetan Tenshindrawa Jungwa, means, well, in the Tibetan it reads very clearly, Tenshin on the basis of this. So with this support, Drelwa, with this connection, Jungwa arising. So it means this is arising in connection with this support. So when you go in to have lunch or you're outside and you turn to talk to someone, what you can say is determined by whether you know them well or not, whether you find an easy point of contact, whether they seem available or not. Your speech is coming out of your mouth in relation to where the other person is. In the same way, how we walk depends on whether we have shoes on or not. Outside there are little stones on the path. If we go out in bare feet, having had shoes inside, having had our feet inside socks and shoes in the winter, the stones will feel sharp. If it's at the end of the summer where we might have been going around in bare feet, the skin will be thicker and we will have a different relation to these sharp stones. This is what this idea of dependent arising or interdependent arising means. That there are no fixed qualities to the individual. They are contingent and contextual. Contingent means they arise as a meeting together of circumstances inside a particular context. So, what is my essence? Who am I? If this Buddhist idea is right, we are not anybody. We are many, many potentials which are activated by circumstances. But of course we also psychologically have conditions described, for example, as depersonalization, where somebody feels they can't find themselves, they feel alienated from themselves, they don't recognize themselves. They look in the mirror and they can't quite get a sense that this is them. That would indicate, well, normally I look in the mirror, I think, well, this is me. So what you have there is a mood of familiarity which has been disrupted by some event. I, me, myself is a patterning with which I am familiar, and that can be affected by severe alcoholic poisoning, many different kinds of drugs, erotic arousal, fear, anxiety. There are many strong experiences which can make us feel not like ourselves. We find ourselves talking and behaving in ways that we're not accustomed to. And then we get back to ourselves. And you think, shit, why did I say that? Oh, I was pissed. Why do I get pissed? I shouldn't say these things. Because when you get drunk, you do things you wouldn't do if you weren't drunk. This is well known. Sometimes we get drunk because we want a holiday from ourselves. But the person who is drunk is not necessarily the best representative of our public relations department. So we all know I can be other than who I generally take myself to be. Who I generally take myself to be, that would indicate then this is a kind of rhythmic formation. This is a pattern or a wave band, if you like, of arousal. Some people are more buoyant or expressive than others. Some people are more quiet or depressed than others. We each have a kind of habitual wave band on the basis of which we might choose the kind of people we hang out with. Either we might have some friends that cheer us up a bit, or other people we talk to when we are particularly in a quiet mood. And some people are just not our cup of tea. We don't get them. We try and speak with them, and that's not necessarily because we're saying, I don't like that person, or I find them boring, or something like that. It's just we can't get them. Strange, isn't it? I mean, I have that when I go in the park and I see people with different kinds of dogs. I think, why would you have a dog like that? Some guy who's 2 meters high and he's got some tiny dog. they find some kind of harmony, which I have no access to. So there we see our lives are patternings, configurations, but no essence to that. The familiarity of myself is dynamic. It is patterns which repeat themselves through time and through space. Now, what this would indicate is that in order to maintain my sense of my stability of self, I am editing out my awareness of my changeability, my volatility, and so on. That is to say, I might not have a very accurate sense of myself. That my story about myself may involve editing out features which would contradict who I am. Many people think they don't get angry. Many people don't know that they get jealous. Many people don't know that they're selfish because they have an image of themselves. And that image then becomes the organizing feature of their existence. And that's very interesting phenomena, because it means instead of the patterning of myself being established by an essence inside me, it's being organized around an idea. That the idea is a kind of prototype or a design plan which is used then to shear away aspects of ourselves which seem to be unnecessary or harmful or just that we don't want. That is to say, in another language, we are a story. There are many modern methods of therapy, narrative therapy, and all its derivatives, which point exactly in that direction. That we are primarily stories we tell about ourselves to other people. And we also tell different stories to different people at different times. And even to the same person we tell different stories according to the circumstances. That is to say, we are coming into formation all the time. And this is what this schema of the 5 skandhas or the 5 heaps points to. That these are factors of organization, factors of construction. What is constructed is not an enduring edifice, an enduring, strongly based fact in the world or thing. What is constructed is particular patterning. And patterns are, of course, always vulnerable to the impact of other patterns, because patterns link with other patterns and then separate. So we're in a mood, and then we get some information from someone else, and our mood changes. We're thinking about something, and then we smell something burning in the kitchen, and you run in, and the thought of all your big ideas has gone out the window. You thought, oh fuck, I've ruined the dinner. And now you're into something completely different. You're focused on the body and saving the top bit of the stuff, take it away from the burnt bit at the bottom, and so on. In an instant, these things happen. So life would be impossible if that wasn't the case. It is the very fact of our not being solid, not being fixed, not being predetermined or overdetermined that allows us to function in our responsive way. So this is another way of saying that wisdom and compassion are born together. It is the absence of inherent self-nature which allows compassion or allows responsiveness, connectivity. So again and again, it's important to keep seeing the connectivity of everything. Our habituation to language tends to get in the way of that. For example, in the room there are some pillars. We might imagine that the pillars are there to hold up the ceiling in some way. But if you look at a pillar, you just think, oh, that's a pillar. That's a pillar doesn't imply that there's anything on the top of it or at the bottom of it. Some pillars are freestanding and don't seem to be doing any work at all. So the word pillar can allow us to forget the ceiling and forget the floor. How many pillars are in the room? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 pillars in the room. How interesting to know this fact. Maybe we could move them around and put them in a different pattern. Maybe not, because there are big beams on top of the pillars. But when you're just thinking of the pillar as a pillar, the beam is invisible to you. This is the key thing, that concepts cut up the world and make the phenomena of the world extractable. It is as if we could then just take the pillar out. It is as if, we get up and we move and we go somewhere else. And that independence of the object, of the thing, brings about the forgetfulness of context. And so we start to think of manipulation of objects. All of us are, I think, aware that in Tibet there was quite a sensitivity to the environment. The weather was pretty extreme. Most of the irrigation of the fields depended on melting snow from the spring and summertime. If water was coming down, you had to be very careful. People would be out all night at the sluice gates to make sure not too much water came into the fields, that it was equally distributed, and so on. Every winter they get heavy snows. In the snows, many of the dzos and yaks and sheep and goats and so on can die, and people starve because of this. So in that environment, there's a lot of sense of having to work with circumstances, that you don't have much power over the weather. And you have these specialists who do mantras and so on to try to control the weather, but it's not so successful. That is to say, mastery exists in that culture as a kind of hope that the great Lama master will be able to make lots of nice things happen. But a lot of time it doesn't happen. So when it does happen, hooray for the master, and when it doesn't happen, oh, we have bad karma. That's a very satisfactory explanatory system. But it's one that involves checks and balances. In the West, with a very materialist culture, we have a different world altogether. We are very good at cutting up the world. We have huge machines that tear into the land. We've got ways of blocking rivers, building huge dams. We have wind power everywhere. These are ways, to a certain extent, of collaborating, but also altering the structure. So we have big campaigns around fracking and nuclear power and so on, where one part of the culture says, this is wonderful, it's going to provide a lot of cheap energy, and others, parts of the culture, other people are thinking, this is maybe very dangerous, because you're putting a huge impact on the environment that will be out of your control. You think you're in control until you have Chernobyl or huge tsunami tidal waves in Japan and so on. Inside the normal frame of reference, this looks wonderful, but there are many other factors outside which can cause a shock. And yet still we're addicted to power. Power has brought us many incredible transformations in medicine. Huge numbers of procedures and operations that go ahead in a invasive but subtle way now, which save lives. And this kind of mastery is based on prediction. For example, anatomy. It's very important that the surgeon has some idea where the arteries and the nerves are. And luckily, most of us have fairly standard bodies. Some people have quite strange things going on inside them, but mainly, having gone through medical school, the surgeon, when she looks at the outside of the body, has a fair sense of what's underneath the skin. Predictability gives a sense of power. That's the basic equation, isn't it? The more you can predict, the more power you have. That's what modern engineering does, electronics, huge amounts of predictability are coming in. The whole wave of the IT industry is gathering more and more information with new algorithms that allow increased predictability, which will empower certain moves in the culture. Maybe the Buddha was wrong then. Maybe it's not impermanent and moving according to random factors. And yet, maybe it is. What's important for each of us is to think about prediction in your own life. Because I think as long as you strongly believe, I can be in charge of my life, I can live life on my terms, you are returned again and again to the sense, I am a freestanding agent, I am the one who makes things happen, and therefore I can exert my will onto the world. But what is the world? Machines don't stop. When I was at school, we had an engineering department in the school because it was in a city very connected with the shipbuilding industry that once existed in Scotland. And we had big lathes. So as a boy of 14, with a huge big lathe, the teacher always said, if I hit you and you say, ouch, I will stop. If you put your finger in the machine and you say, ouch, it won't stop. This is the difference. And that's very important. The machine doesn't stop. It will just keep turning and your finger will vanish. Human responsiveness is finely attuned to nuance, to subtle interpretation. It's through being with other human beings that we get a sense of the limit of our mastery. Whereas the more you function on machines, especially through training machines to act on machines, you have the sense of pure mastery. This is the ethical question behind the American use of drones in Waziristan and so on. Someone in a computer in America is sending weapons into a little village to shoot people. They don't see the person's face. They don't hear the screams. It's just off the list. That might make us kind of scared. It's one thing to have a sword and be fighting someone and see their face. It's another thing to be a sniper in a building half a kilometer away and someone can't see you and you shoot them dead. It's another thing to be operating a drone 7,000 kilometers away. So what I'm suggesting by all these examples is that our use of machines makes it often more difficult to see the problematics of power. because they seem to be in our service. They seem to be making things happen in a way that's truly benign. But actually, they have a high degree of programming inside them. And when you think of the sign for the deer crossing the road, the deer has a sort of programming. When you walk on these country paths, every now and then you see the bushes are a bit depressed and you see, oh, there's a little road. A badger road or a fox road or a squirrel road. Some creature every night is running down that road. And they expect to see what they see, some little mouse to eat or something else. They don't expect to see a truck or a car going very fast. Responsive systems need to operate in harmony with an environment that allows them to respond. The deer, if it's starting to cross the road, doesn't know what to do if it sees a car. We talk about a rabbit in the headlights. The rabbit doesn't know what to do. It doesn't have a concept of a car. It's just got this light and it's transfixed. So there's nothing intrinsically wrong with machines, but I think they can turn our mind towards dominance and control. Many people now have mobile phones and they use them every day. They have no idea how they work. They couldn't repair them if they broke. And yet they feel that I have increased mastery through my mobile phone. This is the mastery of enslavement. If you lose your phone, you've lost all this information. What will you do? So, false mastery is slavery. This is an old Buddhist idea. And the first master is the thought. Concepts are like machines. They are powerful. They do a lot of traction. They pull heavy weights. They make things and constructs. But what are they? They are devoid of inherent self-nature. We use thoughts all the time, and yet you never can catch them, because one thought doesn't exist. Just like one word doesn't exist. Pillar. And pillar. Language is networking, it's linking, it is dependent co-origination. By stringing words together in context with particular people, we weave connectivity which exists as a pattern for a moment and then dissolves. The meaning of words is revealed in their usage, because words come in and out of fashion and they have particular areas of operation. So the absence of inherent self-nature means whenever we think that something truly exists in itself, that it is real or reliable, we should pause and look again. So, mobile phones work because when you hold them in your hand, coming through the ether are waves. And these waves come into your phone and let you speak. They also come into your brain, and we're not sure yet what they do to the brain. Many people are quite anxious about what they do to babies' brains. That we have all kinds of vibrations passing through us. There's some indication that people who live under very high powered electric wires have increased rates of cancer. That may be a folk myth, it may not be. But there's certainly something about interpenetration. That our bodies are penetrated by all sorts of rays and vibrations all the time. And they get to us. So, what is there that exists in the world by itself, independent of everything else? Is there anything that exists in that way? So I would invite you take some minutes talking with someone sitting next to you and see if you can identify any creature or thing which seems to be just itself, independent of everything else. Have a good look. So, did you discover something?
Yes!
Oh!
Can I ask a question? I mean, not in Dzogchen, but in some parts of Buddhism, the unconditioned is a term that gets used. The unconditioned is a term that is used in Buddhism. And we didn't come up with anything that could be unconditioned. Maybe somebody else would. But what is meant by that? Sorry. Okay. So, is the unconditioned unconditioned or is it conditioned?
There are three things which are unconditioned, according to Buddhist teaching in the Abhidharma. There is the sky, enlightenment, and the moment of enlightenment. And the moment of enlightenment has to be unconditioned, because if it was conditioned, then you would enter the unconditioned on the basis of conditionality, which would condition the unconditioned.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So where does Dzogchen share that view the Abhidharma has, or not? Or is it
Yeah, because the mind is like space. It means that the mind as awareness is not conditioned by anything. So it's also called Vajra, which means indestructible. So it means nothing touches it or transforms it, but it's always available, whatever else is arising. So it's not conditioned. But our moods, our thoughts, feelings, sensations, ages, bank accounts, and so on are all conditioned. So, what did you find? Anything?
It's already said, but I thought enlightenment is without composition. It's free from everything. But I don't know what enlightenment is.
Thus have I heard.
And the other thing, another thought is space. In Buddhism always is spoken by space, not space. But Einstein said space is always together with time. It is infinite, but finite too. So it came in my mind, what's about this?
That's the wrong kind of space. Science has many ideas, and these of course are ideas. From the point of view of Buddhism, we're not trying to establish a perfect idea, but to find a way to be present in the simplicity of how it is. So having ideas about how it is may be very interesting, may be very useful, but an idea about something and the immediacy of its presentation are not the same.
But the idea may be right, because of the theory is there, and the experiments are there too today, for the Einstein theory.
Experiments are a sequence of ideas. What else would they be?
If I may add to it, well, all those concepts come only in reference to describing a certain event. And only when you take an event into consideration, space and time also come into description of that event. And otherwise, there is no question at all. And there's no question about space and time if no events are considered. So therefore, physically, all those apply as long as an event is considered. And events always happen in space-time.
As we know in our own minds.
But back to enlightenment, what is it?
Well, enlightenment would mean the light comes on, which implies that the light is not on at the moment.
Again,
So, you know these kind of torches that you get where you have to squeeze the handle.
yeah.
This is the kind of light that we live with.
You?
We squeeze one thought onto another thought, and then a feeling and a sensation, and we are very actively making the light of our mind. If you stop squeezing, it goes dark. But the light of the mind, which is not dependent on effort, the natural clarity of the mind, that's what enlightenment refers to. It doesn't refer to going somewhere else. It refers to relaxing the effort of making artificial light in order to see what light is there. Particularly in the view of Dzogchen. So if we return to this issue of the self-existing entity, again, it's important to think of language. So you have a shop and you have customers. It looks like two things: shop, customers. But without customers, you wouldn't have a shop. So this little particle and, a copulat, a joiner, looks as if it's joining two things. But actually, from the very beginning, shop and customer were born together. Does that make sense? So the and is showing a kind of joint manifestation, a co-emergence. A co-emergence which has multiplicity of formation, but inseparability of the parts. Does that make sense? You get varieties of customers, varieties of objects in the shop, but these parts are, as it were, born together. And this is a very important term in Hinduism and in Buddhism. In Hinduism it's sahaj, which is translated into Tibetan as Hlenchit Chepa, which means born together, arising together. And this is the real meaning of and. So if we say self and other, me and you, it looks as if there are two. But self has no meaning without other. Me has no real meaning unless there's a you. So these are arising not as homogenized into just one thing, but they're not two separate things either. So, for example, if you have two dancers and they're maybe self-choreographing, they're working in an improvisational way, they are co-creating the movement. Even if one is leading more than the other, has more movement of their body, more ideas, the other is part of it from the very beginning. It's a joint enterprise, a joint practice, if you like, which means it's not two things joined together, but the joint is the articulation. That we have these bridges in English, they're called Pontoon Bridges, where you take like old oil drums and link them together with wood on the top, and when you walk on it, it moves like that, or a bit like an articulated lorry. So you have movement with connection. It's not one thing, it's not two things, but it's a flowing and a moving together. And this is the real meaning of non-duality in Buddhism. It's not an esoteric term, but it's referring to the fact that the world, if you like, the environment which might appear to be out there, and ourselves, is joined together from the beginning. If I exist, the world exists. We come into being at the same time, which is, we're not the same. I look out, I see all sorts of stuff. I'm not that stuff. It's not some kind of megalomania. I'm not claiming that everything is just me. But at the same time, how I am is influenced by what I'm encountering. And that has always been the case. From the moment that we are born, when the baby comes out of the mother's body, how they're held, whether, if they're placed on the belly to help the placenta to come out, on the breast, and so on, all of these moves with the smell of the mother's body and so on, the beginning of interest in getting milk, this is a communicative pattern. There is no such thing as a baby. Babies die very easily. Baby and mother go together. So all through our lives, we are joined with the environment, but not as two things joined as in engineering with welding or with rivets, but it's just joined. It is one whole with many different parts moving inside it, and these parts appear fragmented when you don't see the whole. And so if I say me and you, that and can make us very, very far apart or make us very close together. And that's the real difference, that when we think it's an option, me and you, well, it doesn't have to be you, it could be them. Fuck off, I'm going here, this is better. So there's always me, and maybe you, and maybe you. Depends on how I feel. But that's the madness of it, because it's always me and something. And also the me is not stable either. So how me is me depends on the quality of the contact that we different people have. So this is the emptiness or the potential of me niched within the field of the potential of the field of you, and these are co-emergent. And if we start to get the flavor of this, it really shifts how we are, because the choices that we are making in the world is the quality of our participation. So when we went into the kitchen area, in the dining area for lunch, we have various kinds of food laid out, and we each choose what we're going to eat. That looks like an individual action. Someone may choose not to eat anything. Someone may choose to eat a lot, or to try everything that's there. But the experience of seeing something and responding, whatever the content of the response is, the responsivity of being influenced by what's happening in you, how hungry you feel, how you respond to what is laid out in front of you, this is joint from the very beginning. So the details of what is chosen would appear to mark critical differentiation between people, because we end up sitting down together, but we can see we have different things on our plates. So this is what I eat, but it's not quite what you eat, therefore we are different. And yet these are all modes of participation. And from the Buddhist point of view, this is very important, because it's the field of participation which is unified, but the contents of what manifests in participation which are different. And so if the field becomes invisible to us, all we have is the stuff, the contents. And then we feel very differentiated from other people, because we think, God, how do you do that? Why would you do that? That's not me. So in the example some of us have looked at in the past, we have the mirror and the reflections. The reflections are in the mirror. They are inseparable from the mirror. You can't take the reflection out of the mirror. But when we look at the mirror, what we see are the reflections, and we see different images reflected in the mirror. It appears as if there are different things which are being reflected, but they are unified or held as a whole because of the nature of the mirror. When we forget the mirror, the reflections look like different things. When we remember the mirror, the reflections are remembered as reflection, inseparable from the mirror. Nothing is altered. No shape of the reflection is changed by awakening to the fact, oh, these are reflections. In the same way, in our own lives, being here together, we see all the different people in the room. We are like the reflections in the mirror of the mind. Each of us, including ourselves, and all that we see are experiences. We experience ourselves, we experience others. The basis of this experience is the mind, which is like a mirror. And therefore all experiences are collaborating and moving together in this shimmering open clarity of the field of the mind. And this has always been the case. Loss of presence of the openness of awareness gets me back into my ego limited way of thinking. Oh, there's quite a lot of people here. I wonder how many men there are in relation to women. What is the average age of people here? You could do all kinds of thoughts or reflections on what is going on. What does this mean? And the more you get into these thoughts, they seem to isolate particular individuals, and then you can have opinions about them, like, not like, older, younger, and so on. And you're giving yourself access to a construction which is like this torch which you keep pumping. The more thoughts you have about a particular person, they seem to get a bit brighter because you're illuminating them with your thoughts. But what you're doing at the same time is you're extrapolating them, you're taking them out of their context. And so you've made an artificial, decontextualized entity which exists only in your mind. You have made them according to your own image, which are the images in your mind. And so the world becomes full of stuff, just as your mind becomes full of stuff. Yeah?
You spoke now quite a lot of stuff, of forms and so on. But what about energy? We were a little bit joking, but also a little bit serious about the issue. Is love, not love in a sexual union, but love as compassion, let's say. Is this reliable? Is this energy undestructible or not? Is this energy also like a form? For instance, in the real life, if there is something, I'm angry with, that's also kind of energy. And I cannot imagine why this energy is coming now, and I cannot deal with it, and so on. And the harder I try to get rid of it, the worse it is, and so on. But this kind of energy, is it here? Is it like form, like emptiness, or not?
Well, that's a very interesting area, because of course the word love can mean many things. As you say, it can have a sexual context, and in English there's a saying, love is blind. And that's primarily about a projective love. You fall in love with someone, but you're actually usually projecting some image onto them. But if you took the traditional example, which would be the mother's love for a child, which is used a lot in Buddhism, if the baby is going to survive, it's very, very important that someone tunes in to variations in their state. Are they too hot? Are they thirsty? Are they able to breathe in how they're lying? Somebody has to be looking. And so the mother's love for the baby is a quality of clarity, that she is returned again and again to an attentive observation which illuminates the actual state of the baby. So you could say then that love is a quality of attention. So if you have a hobby, wood carving or making pots or painting, your love for your hobby brings your attention back into that again and again. So in that sense, love is a quality of clarity, and clarity is the basis for compassion. So because everything is linked together, you could describe it as a field of interactive energy which will show itself most precisely through our ability to keep seeing without imagining. So, when people come to psychotherapy, one of the things they're often indicating, directly or indirectly, is that they haven't been seen enough as children. That sometimes the parents are drunk or not interested, sometimes the parents have a lot of expectations about the child and so project an image of the child onto the child. And so the particular patterning of that child's energy has not been attended to in its nuancing, in its subtle variation. And that leads to a kind of loneliness and alienation. And that can lead to the person making trouble at school in order to get more attention, even if it's not a positive kind of attention. It can lead to all sorts of patterns. And when, generally speaking, I think when children get attention which is truly about them, they relax because they're seen. Just as when a plant gets the amount of sunshine and rain and protection from the wind that's good for it, it will blossom. Attention is the ripening factor for our existence. Would you say? That seems to be true. So, love then is the quality of clarity or availability that allows us to blossom. So we know what that's like. You know, something happens at work and maybe you come home and you want to talk to your friend and they're not there. They're preoccupied with something. And you try to tell them about what your day has been like and they're not getting it. They fucking hell, I've had a shit day. But they've had a shit day too. But it makes a real difference if they're available and they hear you. And then you just say it once. And that hearing allows the dissolving. Because it's this and then it's gone. But if it's not heard, if you're blanked or cut off, it sort of runs around inside you and it can start to fester. And that's the root of a lot of neurosis. So, presence, awareness, is actually the prime healing factor. Because it's not hanging on to things to keep them from the past. It's not waiting expectantly for something more exciting or better from the future. It's with what's here and allowing it to go. But when we incorporate other people into the maintenance of our self-image, then in order for me to be me, I need you to be the one who sees me as the me that I think I am. And stay on that point. And that's very difficult. Because it means then we're both making a kind of devil's contract. I will reassure you that you're you as long as you continue to reassure me that I'm me. And then we can each collapse into our assumptions. And we don't need to look at each other at all. because I know what you're like, and you know what I'm like. And a lot of relatedness goes on like that, and it becomes quite tamasic, quite stuck and sinking. Whereas freshness means not knowing, but being available. Which means then that the other person can show themselves in the richness of their variety, without that being taken as an attack on ourselves. But if I'm using you to stabilize my sense of self, I don't want you to change. And this is the problem of human relatedness when people collapse onto each other. That there isn't space, and then often at a certain point they break up, and now there's space, but there's too much space, and then you meet someone else and you collapse together again, rather than thinking, can we have the freshness that comes from experiencing each other in space? Not underdetermined, not overdetermined, in fact not determined but present. Good luck. Okay, time for a quick cup of tea, 15-minute break or so. So, Buddhist idea is that all the sufferings that sentient beings in any direction experience arise from ignorance and attachment. And attachment is a kind of refuge. We take refuge in our identity, where we live, friends, family, and so on. That these are the objects and people and possessions which reassure us about the continuity of our existence. Buddhist practice generally begins with taking refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, and so on. That is to say, a refuge which points away from the objects of ordinary daily attachment towards something more reliable. That it's a kind of homeopathic dose, because in saying I take refuge in the Buddha, you're developing an attachment. You're saying being attached to the Buddha and the Buddha's teaching and the association of those who truly follow the Buddha's teaching is more healthy than the kind of refuge that I take in my appearance or my health or my money, my friends, whatever it would be. It's still a form of attachment. Why do we need that? Because our desire for attachment is very strong. And like drowning people, when we get anxious, we reach out and hold on to whatever is there. And that's usually some composite of the patterns we have developed in our lives. Some people under pressure turn to drugs or alcohol or working harder or to weeping or to worrying. There are many activities which can be habituated both as a means of expressing how we feel, but also a kind of compensation for how we feel. If only I had more of this, I would be okay. And then we get more, but it's never quite enough. So, the Buddhist critique of ordinary worldly attachments is twofold. The objects that we cling to are impermanent and changeable, and therefore disappointment and a sense of betrayal is likely to be embedded in them. And secondly, in the process of making that attachment to the object, I'm developing a limited sense of myself. I am the particular person who relies on this kind of object. This is my bicycle. This is my flat. This is my music collection. So not only is there the enclosure of the shaping of the object, but the shape of the object is also shaping me. And so I become limited through my attachment. My hope is that the more that I get will somehow extend me and expand me and broaden my horizon, and yet because of the nature of the reliance itself, I become small, because I become protective of what I have. And by developing this particular interest, there are many other things which don't interest me. So we've got a kind of figure ground development here. Some things are brought forward and therefore everything else is put back. And after a while, the objects of my attachment support me in the lack of necessity to move out of my comfort zone. Because I've got what I need, I don't need to be interested in all these other possibilities. This will be enough. And so a small life becomes sort of cozy or emotionally reassuring, and diminishment starts to feel like safety. Does that make sense? And so we don't want to be troubled. We don't want to have unsettled circumstances, which could be full of new possibility, but would involve shifting out of the sclerotic carapace, the shell that has formed around us through our own attachment and repetition compulsion.
What does sclerotic mean?
Like a hardening, so that something doesn't move. It's a loss of articulation. So when we take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, the idea is to rely on something which will not make us smaller, but will always be extending us. So when we take refuge in the Buddha, Buddha is the one who awakened. So we're saying, excuse me, being awake is better than being asleep. Finding out is better than assuming, which means we have to look. So if I take refuge in the Buddha, I commit myself to looking again and again, and looking further, to really inquiring. Taking refuge in the Dharma means listening to Dharma ideas, but also massaging them into myself and applying them, and using them as a way of helping me to see. To see what? To see that which dissolves the assumptions that I have. So it's to take refuge in the Buddha and Dharma is a very big step, because it's a very radical step, which means instead of relying on the beliefs that I have, I'm going to examine these beliefs and put them into question, and hopefully I'll do it deeply and profoundly successfully, so that I'm not relying on anything. I'm going to use reliance on the Buddha to dissolve reliance. So for example, in the refuge prayer we say, I take refuge in the Buddha until enlightenment is gained. Because when you get enlightened, you don't need the Buddha. The Buddha is a method for freeing ourselves from ordinary attachment. So, for example, when you're young and healthy, if you're attractive, it opens many doors and there are many possibilities, and that is a moment of opportunity or access to a particular range of feelings. And then it's gone. It was there and then it's gone. It's something to be used, but it's not a stable basis. And this is what we were looking at earlier. If we can't find anything which is self-existing, if everything is linked in together and articulated, then a movement in another place will move my world. Chinese economy is slowing down. China wants to dump a lot of steel. A lot of steel is coming into Europe. This undercuts the price of European production. Should we raise a trade barrier against China? China can be quite vindictive, as we know, in its trade relations. Anything for a quiet life, or we stand up for ourselves? Do we want a trade war? These are the questions that are going on all the time. So there's no such thing as European or German steel production. You produce steel in order to sell it, and you can only do that if you make a profit on it, and the profit is affected by people living thousands and thousands and thousands of miles away. There is no such thing as the German steel industry. There is a world market in steel, and now what we're getting back to, America's been putting in protective barriers, tariffs against the import of certain commodities coming from Japan. So capitalism only works if you have open free trade, because you want to drive the price down. It's a competitive market, but if you do that, you end up with no steel industry. So you put in barriers. And this is very helpful for us to think about. We feel best when we are connected with other people, but then we might feel a bit overwhelmed, so we put up our trade barriers. We say, oh, I don't feel like seeing anyone. I'm going to unplug the phone. Because connectivity means everything moves. It's both enriching and potentially depleting. What it certainly means is the world of tomorrow is not the same as the world of today. So when we are attached to finite forms, to patterns and particulars, we're going to feel upset and anxious because we don't know what will happen. And nobody knows what will happen. So that's the real meaning of taking refuge, is rather than focusing on getting more control over the variable factors of our existence, a control which is an illusion and never really achieved, we look for a refuge somewhere else. I don't know if they have one in this building, but some of you will know the Buddhist Wheel of Life, where you see the representation of the 12 factors that keep conditioned existence going. And up in one corner there is a Buddha, and he's pointing over to an empty circle, which is the circle which is not full of the dynamics of samsara, the spacious possibility of the mind itself. So what's a very important reflection for each of us is to think, what do I take refuge in? What are the factors which reassure me about who I am? These could be anything. These could be sentimental attachments like old love letters. They could be a favorite painting. It could be records. It could be a plate you inherited from your mum. It could be anything. Something which is invested with a significance for you. Because this exists, I am. And what we were looking at earlier in terms of dependent origination would indicate that's exactly right. we become into ourselves as a person in terms of our developmental journey through the patterning of our parents, their interests, and so on. Sometimes parents drive their children in directions that are good for the kid, but they drive them too hard, or maybe not so good for the kid, and later the child has a difficulty in working out what to do. These patterns of formation lead us into particular alliances in which we have become ourselves through the actions of others. Which means that even myself is not mine. Even if I feel I have a self, it's been generated out of all the experiences that I've ever had. That is to say, I've internalized or introjected aspects of my parents, school teachers, and all the rest of it. What you might call object relations. I am inhabited by or infected by images and echoes and resemblances of others who act within me as psychological forces. So I am always already occupied by other people, just as we are by language. We didn't invent our language. Language speaks through us, and indeed language speaks us, because the notion of our limited identity is embedded in language. So if we say, I take refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, it means, A, positively, that's what I want to hang on to, because there seems to be a bit more mileage in that. And over these next couple of days, we can get more sense of what the Buddha and Dharma and Sangha is. But it also means, if I'm going to have refuge in that, I'm not going to have refuge in these other things. So we have to investigate for ourselves, can I participate in the world with the structures and phenomena of my general daily life without feeling that I am relying on them? That is to say, I have a functional reliance without an invested reliance. And that's the key thing. So, for example, I've been tidying out many old papers that I accumulated through the time I was teaching psychotherapy. And some of them I give to some of my final supervisees, and some I throw in the bin. And then I found this whole stack of essays that I had written when I was training in psychotherapy. And I take them out and I read them and I put them in the rubbish. I take them out of the rubbish, I put them back in the filing cabinet. Maybe I need to read these again later. Why? 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Oh, I did that. I wouldn't like to show them to anyone else. That would feel too narcissistic. But I might like to look at them myself, because they remind me of me, all that I have done. Imagine losing that. Who would I be? And that's exactly the fulcrum point. That's the point of pressure. Oh, that's what I'm taking refuge in. All that I have done. Even if nobody else knows it, I did that. And it's gone. And that's what attachment is. When you see that retractive pull, this is my story. I remember all these evenings at the end of work, going in the underground to Hampstead, to the training institute, and sitting in a circle with a bunch of shits who I didn't like, wanking on about Sigmund Freud and so on. And then I got my bit of paper. And it doesn't matter. It's irrelevant, finished, but it's still relevant. And what's really interesting in these moments is to see these little tendrils. Some are coming from the heart, some from the belly, some in the head. I want to hang on to this. If I let go of that, who would I be? And that's where you can experience the existential terror. It's one thing to talk about openness and spaciousness, but the ego gets very scared in that. It's too naked. What about these familiar wrappings? Because if you get rid of all the wrappings, if you get rid of your history, who are you? What ground would you be standing on to say anything at all? So, renunciation means we have to go back and let go. And of course, the letting go from the mind is much more important than the letting go from the drawer. Because these things were in the drawer for 20 years, I didn't look at them. It's only in the moment when they come back into my mind that I look at them, that I see the glue. The glue is in the mind. So, maybe we could just sit quietly for a while and just reflect on some of your possessions and the people around you and what function you would have if they vanished. Imagine them dying. Imagine your parents dying, your children dying, your friends dying. Without you, I am, ? What would I be if all that I know and rely on wasn't there, and I wake up in the morning, no job, nobody needs anything from you. I am irrelevant. I have no function. What is that like?
Emancipation. The emancipation of something.
The
The emancipation.
Sorry, I
The
don't-
dementia patient. Sorry.
Dementia patients, they have exactly that, yeah. They have exactly that. And it can be very terrifying in the moments of lucidity to have that loss. But what we as meditators, what we want is more and more clarity about the relationship we have with the phenomena which are arising and passing. Because to experience something in its immediacy and freshness, that's one thing. It's maybe put the question another way is, what is the heaviness of the ego, or what is the heaviness of my sense of self that makes it feel as if it needs a support?
I have one question. Because for me, it's always at that point is the issue of survival from the mammalian brain, and then this thing comes, oh, I'm not independent, I'm dependent, I'm food, I'm house, I'm this and that, and then all the things come up again. It's fine when I meditate and I feel connected to my Buddha nature, or I am identified in that awareness, but then suddenly life seems to be going on. I need to participate. And
Yeah.
then all those ego structures come back. Who do I want to be? What profession is suitable from what I experienced so far in life?
So the question there would be the pragmatics or the practical use of the objects of our life, maintaining a job or a car or
That
whatever,
we need the relationship
without the additional investment of this is who I am. Because we're here for a while. If we die, other people will inherit what we have. They throw most of it away, hang on to a little bit of it, and life moves on. And yet, everything we're using, we're just using. Using means today this is mine and tomorrow it could be yours, but it's mine, and it's that particular quality of the added investment of self-reference. I'm using the object to confirm myself rather than I'm using the object as a means of participating in the world. Some people are very proud of their car. If you want to know about me, look at the kind of car I have. That's a very different kind of relationship. But certainly we have to participate in the world.
I haven't really got it so far. I mean, without attachment, I know, I understand. Moving through life without attachment has a different quality. But then you have subtle neuroses or things, kind of something hooks you in very subtly, and it could kick you
Yeah.
off your path immensely, and
Yeah.
you turn up to panic then and to go into anxiety.
That's right.
Because you already know your path is the awareness.
And that's really the work, firstly, of analytical examination, and then we'll take it into the meditation, is to go close to these areas which are scary and terrifying, and to see that the fear comes from a false construction of who we are. Because all of us in this room have already lost so many things in our life. All our old shoes, for example. Many have gone. So we've had things that were very intimately connected with ourselves and are now gone. So we know how to invest and divest, that there is a pulsation in that, and then sometimes we don't divest, sometimes we cling on. And that's the real point of the Buddhist inquiry, is what is that not releasing? And what's at stake in that?
Is the mechanism, would you say the mechanism is the same whether one identifies with something one is proud of, some degree or whatever, or on the other hand something that is a view that is quite painful, like a sort of idea of separateness, or, I never make this. Do you think the mechanism is the same?
If you have a core negative belief, if you're saying I'm unlovable or I'm stupid or I'll never be successful, that has a very powerful glue in it. So you can build your ego structure on all kinds of flavors of thoughts and feelings. The question at the heart of it is, well, what is the ego? I mean, in the sense, the ego is a pattern which forms and reforms again and again. It's an empty site which seeks to be full of something. If I say I, the first person singular, it needs to have a content. I is empty. I is a potential. I. And even if I say I am, it's still gesturing towards something else. So I am tired, or I am sick, or I am happy. Now there is a formation, and in the description you get the self-filling, which then allows some building up of a kind of image. So if I say I'm stupid, I'm a failure, I wish I'd done something else with my life, there's quite a lot of potential in there for really hating yourself, for regret, for worry, for shame, and so on. And all of these become contents of the sense of self. But this self has no content of its own. And this is why mental activity can't stop, because its job is to provide content for the subject. The subject without a content is awareness. The subject with a content is the ego sense of self. It's the same basic noetic capacity, the capacity for clarity, but one's knowing is linked with identification. It seems to create, a kind of skin or sealant around it. So, if I say something which is a pure description, I have a cold, or I am a bit sick, it's just describing some tension in my throat, and so on and so forth. But it's also giving a kind of shaping. It's giving a kind of, I'm sick. Therefore, so I can now use that description of a transitory state that I've had before in my life that I'm not afraid of, but it can become an exchange mechanism with other people. I'm a bit sick, you should be nicer to me, or I'm a bit sick, don't expect so much from me, or this is who I am. And then it will fill with something else. But in that moment of formation, there's a kind of added impact because the simple description attracts into itself a whole range of associated ideas. So in this idea of the 5 skandhas, the 4th skandha, samskara, is the gathering together of associations to enrich the meaning potential of the object or situation which is being identified. So I become aware that my throat starts to cough a little bit, I have a particular taste in my mouth, and then it's very easy to elaborate from that. Like a dead cow in India attracts vultures flying through the sky from a far distance off because they smell the rotting meat. These associations gather in us and start to peck away and unpack the potential of I'm a bit sick. And then you have an elaborated story. So that's the thing that's really interesting to observe. The dynamic construction of particular self-positionings. That this is activity, process, energy movement, which seems to create something solid. Listen, I'm a bit sick. Okay, I'm sick. Boom, boom. This is something. This is a state that I'm in, but the state exists as a process. It's a dynamic state, an interactive state. And so what you see here is the actual, if you like, verbal formation of our world, the moving activity of our world, which is rarefied to appear like a succession of nouns. So, I am sick is a description of the arising of signs and symptoms which are all impacting from moment to moment. There is no substance to it, it's just a particular patterning. But once you add a particular tonal quality to, well, I'm sick, it now becomes something which I inhabit. And that's what is so interesting for us. You know, if you feel hungry or you feel you need to go to the toilet or you feel bored, whatever the feeling is, observe how you move from a simple description of the arising pattern, which then unfolds into something else, and when you grasp it, how it becomes solidified and becomes the basis for story construction. Because this is the heart of this 4th skandha. In Tibetan it's called du-che. Du means to gather together, and che means to do. So it's the activity of composition in which we construct a particular formation of ourselves, which then affects how we interact with other people and relate back to ourselves. And the constituents out of which we have made this have already passed, because they're always changing. But the edifice structure seems to leave a trace, a bit like a snake sloughing off its skin. There's no life in the dead skin of the snake, and yet it's something. It's like a kind of ghost. So these echo feelings in ourselves although there's nothing much there, somehow they indicate a substantiality. And that's what we have to return to again and again. Okay, so maybe we just take a little time quietly contemplating what are the factors out of which our sense of self is constructed, and how do we imagine we would be if we lost these? What is left if I don't have the factors that reassure me that I am who I think I am? Okay, so maybe take a few minutes just talking with a neighbor, seeing what sort of words would come to mind to describe how you would feel if you lost all these objects of your attachment. So, what sort of words were around for the experience of losing everything?
Panic.
Freedom.
Yeah. Relaxing.
Relaxing. Yes.
Wow!
Right.
Bereavement.
Bereavement. Yeah.
What?
Bereavement.
What's in German?
When somebody dies, being bereft.
Like a kind of grief.
Grief.
The loss of
Starting again.
What? Or the frustration.
the habitual patterns couldn't be reenacted. There would be a lack.
Inventing everything new.
Mm-hmm.
So the habitual patterns are reactivated because the things have been taken away and now I have to substitute them and I do it in exactly the same pattern again.
Right.
Openness.
So the openness could be freedom or could be panic.
Oh.
Yeah.
Or avoidance.
Mm-hmm.
Also.
So one of the things that it might be important to consider is, a lot of Buddhist teaching is may all sentient beings be happy. We have an aspiration that happiness is good. The corresponding aspect of that is, and therefore pain is bad. Suffering is bad. We don't want suffering, we want to have happiness. This is a very prejudicial reading. All over the world there are many people who are suffering. And from the point of view of meditation, not of ordinary social discourse, but the point of view of meditation, what makes the suffering worse is the thought, I shouldn't be suffering, life could be better, why me, and so on. These elaborations that say, if it happens to someone else, okay, but when it happens to me, I don't like it, I don't want it. So the ego is faced with something which it can't metabolize, it can't chew it up and integrate it because it feels poisonous. Suffering is an indication that something is wrong, and therefore something should be done. This should be done, so we have to start again or do something new. But for many people in the world, of course, there is nothing to be done. People get chronic illnesses and so on, degenerative diseases, and things will only get worse. And that is their life. And if we have our ordinary hierarchical thing, happiness, freedom, joy up here, and entrapment, pain, enslavement down here, then we have to say, these people have diminished lives. How could you fully occupy, how could you fully inhabit sadness, loneliness, crying yourself to sleep at night, and so on? From the point of view of meditation, these are experiences. I'm sitting with my tears. I'm sitting with the sadness. That sadness and happiness have the same basic taste, which is emptiness. But when we say, no, happiness is full of happiness, sadness is full of sadness. They're not the same. Happiness exists, sadness exists. Then we are in the turmoil of the waves of happenstance. We're tumbled around by hopes and fears. The real exit is to see the equality of happiness and sadness. So it says in the Dzogchen text, if you go to heaven, go to heaven. If you go to hell, go to hell. It doesn't mean that they will taste the same. On the level of manifestation, you have the unique specificity of each moment. It is what it is. Pain is not pleasant. Otherwise it would be called pleasant. Pain is pain, and it's empty. How do we experience the emptiness of depression, loneliness, mood swings, anxiety, panic attacks, and so on? Only by being present with them, seeing that they arise due to causes and conditions and pass away due to causes and conditions. They have no inherent self-nature. And so when we enter into a judgment about them and say, firstly, I don't like this, doesn't mean very much, but what you're doing now is saying, I cannot inhabit my life. I'm going to evacuate myself from my own situation to try to live apart. So you fragment yourself as a kind of defensive measure, just as if a fox gets its foot trapped in one of these metal clamps, it bites its foot off and hobbles away. So we're now going to bite bits of ourselves off and spit them out because I don't want to be sad. So from the meditational point of view, the question is, well, we have to learn how to be sad. It's not very difficult. You are sad. So just be with the sadness. You feel lonely, you can be with the loneliness. Because if you do long retreats, you're certainly going to feel lonely and sad and confused and lost. And if we imagine that these states are signs that something is wrong and something must be done, that is to say that we have to change the situation in order to shift our affect, then we're on this treadmill of working and moving and acting. And so part of the practice is making friends with the mind as it is. And this, of course, is always the middle way, not merging into the experience so that you're only sad and carried away by it, not standing apart from it and observing it as if it's something different from you, but being present with it the way the reflection is present in the mirror. I feel agitated. I feel confused. I feel lost. So the lostness arises. It pervades the mind the way a cloud can fill the sky, but it's not the same as the mind. So we're not getting rid of it by pushing it away. We are, if you like, getting rid of it by a kind of paradoxical intimacy. When you look into a mirror, you see your face in the mirror. The mirror is not protecting itself against your face, but the mirror is not the reflection. And this is the heart of the practice we'll be doing over the next couple of days. It's to see the non-duality of the spacious mind and what arises in the mind. And this is hidden from us when we think, but I'm me, and we go into our ego shape, our substantial self, and we think, I will not be me if I have this, so I have to get rid of that in order to come back to being me. So then there's always this trying to get the things we like, hanging on to them, and trying to get rid of the things we don't like. And this is the very opposite of the meditation. So whether we are happy or sad, whether we feel expansive or contracting, whether we feel hopeless or full of hope, however the mind is showing itself, relax, open, and stay present with that. And of course, that really is only possible if we allow ourselves to see the emptiness of phenomena. Because if I have some ink and I drop it on my shirt, it will leave a stain. The ink will merge into the cloth and become part of it. And I might not be able to wash out the ink stain, because the cloth is absorbent. Now, the mirror takes, if you like, the stain of the reflection inside it, but it's unstained. The ego, our ordinary sense of self, is like a shirt. It's very absorbent. Things get to us. We become upset, and then we can't free ourselves from that upset. We have to wait until it gradually moves away. The stain gets washed out after being in the machine several times. But the mirror is instantly liberated from what's there. And this comes back to the question of attachment. What keeps the stain in the ego? It's the ego's desire to hang on to its content as if that content was meaningful. So, for meditators, this is like a kind of litmus test or touchstone for identifying whether you're caught up in ego formation or whether you're in a relaxed open awareness. The awareness is called Vajra, indestructible, because like the mirror, it's not touched by the content. The content is in it, appears to be it, and yet is not. But the ego gets caught up in stuff and full of reactivity. And that's the big shift that we want to be moving, and we'll use the Heart Sutra to help us understand how to do it. Not to change the outer formations of the world, because sometimes we can't. Sometimes we are just lonely. Someone close to us dies, and that leaves a kind of aching feeling inside. Then that's just there. That's what it is. That is now part of how we are. It's not a mistake. It's not a punishment. It's not something terrible or awful. It's just how it is. It's like this. And so allowing it to be as it is, there is a freedom. Not the freedom of being apart from in a kind of dualistic separative way, but apart from it by knowing the mind is the host, this is the guest. Guests leave after a while. And they go, and it goes, and it goes. So that is the basis for the Buddhist notion of fearlessness. It says that the Dharmakaya, the mind itself, is free of fear and anxiety because it's never actually touched or contaminated by what is there. And that's the big difference. So that gives us a focus for what we do. Now we have some food, and then we can meet back just after 8 o'clock and do a bit of final sitting for today. As I'm sure you're very well aware, Buddhism, like most religions, uses the metaphor of a journey. That we go from one place to another place. You go from samsara to nirvana, or you go from the outside to the inside. You go from the beginning of the Bodhisattva path up the 10 stages along the 5 ways to arrive at the goal. The notion of a journey involves certain factors. For example, you have to be fit and ready for the journey. So you have to get the basic necessities to have a precious human birth, to meet with the dharma and so on. That's involved in that. You have to develop the capacity to endure the difficulties of the journey, which is described in the 6 or 10 paramitas, patience, endurance, and so on. In order to make the journey, you also have to build up the two accumulations of merit and wisdom, and then you have to apply yourself successively to the stages of the path, to the lamrim. Without effort, this is not going to happen. So the implicit message here is, it's all up to you. The Dzogchen view is different from that. Although the practice of Dzogchen, as it's often taught, is exactly the same as that. And I'll explain why. The view of Dzogchen is, from the very beginning, the mind is completely pure. Pure means there has never been a defilement, because defilement is impossible. So, in terms of the metaphor we've used, it's like the mirror. It's never contaminated by any content which has arisen within it. It doesn't need cleaning, it doesn't need improving. This has always been present with us from the very beginning, because it's the basis of all experience. You can't lose it, you can't find it, you can't buy it, you can't sell it. It's not an object, it's not a commodity. The mind is what we are. What hides us from it and it from us is our own mental activity. Just as on a bright summer's day, if you go outside and stare at the sky and focus your attention onto the sun directly, after quite a short period of time you're blinking and you'll feel blind. And if you really do it, you will actually go blind. You are blinded by the light of the sun, which gives you the light whereby you see. So, from the Dzogchen point of view, it is the light of the mind, the radiance of the mind, which blinds us to the radiance of the mind. Recognizing everything which occurs as the radiance of the mind, you're no longer looking at it as if it was an object, but you become the ground, or you experience, you open yourself to the fact that from the very beginning, your mind has operated as the open ground, what's called the mowo, the clarity which arises from that effortlessly, the rongin, and the specificity of how it manifests moment by moment in relation to others, the tukche, or the energy, or compassion. And these three are indivisible. They're always integrated. So this is our actual situation. And because it's here, the only thing that stops us being with it is ourselves. Our own mental activity mesmerizes, and there's a kind of auto-hypnosis, so that we fill ourselves with intoxicating dreams rather than being present with the actuality. These intoxicating dreams are not other than the radiance of the mind. So it's not as if you go from A to B, that you go from the natural state to some unnatural state. Everything is natural. But some natural states have a direct connection with the ground, and some have a mediated connection with the ground. What mediates the connection with the ground is light reflecting off itself. So the movement of the mind is the clarity or natural radiance of the mind, and it shimmers, and we're blinded by our own shimmering. That's all. Therefore, don't shimmer. That's all. So, in the practice, we can do it in different ways over the next few days, but tonight we just do the most simple form. You sit in a comfortable way, the gaze is open, the chin is slightly elevated into the space in front of you. Relax into the out-breath, and stay present with whatever is occurring. The most important problem which arises in that is to start with the assumption, I am the looker. Because if I am the looker, I'm looking at stuff out there. The mirror is not looking, the mirror is showing. What does it show? Everything. This body, with its sensations of posture and so on, breathing, internal proprioception, memories, thoughts and so on. What's revealed through the open gaze, color, shapes and so on. All of this is an undivided field of experience. So, don't hold the world outside, don't hold yourself inside, but allow the radiance of the mind, which is to say everything, to arise and pass as it does. The unimpeded movement, and sometimes the mind looks like the subject, sometimes the mind looks like the object. It's neither the object nor the subject, but these are just the ways of showing. Whatever happens, whether it appears clear or cloudy, whether it's exciting or dull, whether you feel confused or happy, don't do anything. Allow whatever arises to come and then to go. It is the mind's own intervention in the stream of the mind which creates the problem, where we try to correct something which doesn't need correcting. The mind is self-correcting. It's self-liberating. So this is our basic practice, and we'll do it many times over the next few days. And all that's required is simply to rest in the natural clarity of the mind without waiting expectantly for what has not yet come, grasping after what has gone, without making judgments about this is good, this is bad, I need more of this, I need less of that. When you think of the mirror, there are two things. You look at the reflection. Everything in the mirror is reflection. That's all it is. It's just reflection. It's impossible for one bit of a reflection to be better than another. But you look at your face in the mirror and you think, oh, that doesn't look very good. Maybe I've got a pimple. So now this pimple reflected is bad and the rest of your face is okay. So you're making a discrimination between empty reflections. So this is what happens in the meditation. Everything which arises is just the clarity of the mind. But we say, this thought is good, I want more. This thought is bad, I want less. The nature is the same. Empty, shimmering, arising and passing. So one's own judgment cuts the field, attributes value, and this is the unnecessary mobilization of the energy of the mind against the mind itself. So, this is like a child which is demanding a lot of attention. If you tell the child to behave, they now have the basis of angry dialogue. If you indulge them in what they're doing, it doesn't help. You have to make the tantrum of the child irrelevant. We're having a good time? Do enjoy what you're doing. Stuff is arising in the mind. Nothing to do with me. Every time you invest a thought with this is good or this is bad, you intensify the dualistic perception which hides you from yourself. Very simple, very clear, but not so easy to do. Not so easy to do because it involves not doing anything. So the twitchy, energetic arousal that comes from disordered prana, the over-tightness of the central channel and so on, all of these manifest as very ordinary kind of meditation problems. But in Dzogchen, although there are many, many techniques, the principal one is simply whatever is happening, that's where you are. If something is being experienced, there is an experiencer. The experiencer is like Janus with two faces. One face looks towards the ground, one face looks towards the phenomena. If these two faces are not in harmony, when you look towards the phenomena, you will necessarily enter into judgment. So, you keep one face on the ground, the open emptiness, and then the revealing clarity. In the clarity, there is no need to enter into any sort of relation with what is coming, because it's already there. It's already in your mind. It's in the mind and passing through. In the mind and passing through. So, it's already too late. It's already happened. Life has always already happened. This is it. So your opinion about whether it's good or bad or right or wrong is irrelevant. You are the policeman arresting the criminal after the murder. That doesn't help the dead person. It keeps the policeman in a job. The ego is running after the moment. The ego is always out of time. It's a very bad dancer. What is on time, on the beat, moment by moment, is awareness. Enough talking, Mr. Throat. So, now we sit and relax and do the practice. So that's a practice we do many times. It's the practice which allows us to see the birth of samsara in our own mind. When thought identifies with thought as being something other than thought, you have the encapsulation in the samsaric bubble. And when you allow the flow of all experience in the uninterrupted wholeness of the mind itself, then the mind as the infinity of the Dharma Dhatu displays itself as its own radiance. This is what is always here. This is why it's called the natural state or the naked situation of the mind. And it's difficult for us to do, although it's very simple, because it involves no conscious intentionality. We're not being asked to do anything. As I say, there are many different techniques you can learn, but the problem with technique is it always operates on the basis of subject, object, and the energetic connection between the two. And the better you get at technique, the more you get pulled into the fantasy of mastery. And this is in Dzogchen seen as being unhelpful, because the mind does itself. The unborn openness of the mind, without effort, Plundrup, shows itself. It doesn't need interference from any human cogitation. It just is. It just is. And this is what we want to relax into again and again. It's also a very good way of going to sleep at night. You can sit up a little bit in the bed and just rest in that openness, and gradually you find yourself as having gone to sleep. But it brings more space and light into the sleep process. So we're almost at the end for today, and tomorrow morning we start at 7 o'clock for those who wish with Eva. And we'll say something about it.
Yeah, for those who like, we start at 7 o'clock. We meet, if the weather's fine. We will meet at the front door, and we go out in the fields for a silent walk, and there's a point where there's a beautiful view of the hills and fields and animals, and there we'll do some movements for the breath and the joints and for the energetic system, and hopefully you like it. We'll see. You enjoy it. And then we return to this room, and we'll do half an hour of meditation. And if it's raining, we'll start with meditation at 7, and after half an hour we do half an hour of body work, body exercises.
And I would certainly recommend you to have a taste of that, because the work together, particularly on the text, involves quite a lot of sitting, and it's also a lot about ideas. And the key thing is not to become up in your head and intellectual about it, but to bring it into the body again and again. So the movement together and the openness in nature is a very important part of our practice. So now it is night time, and I see you in the morning, if we are all still alive. Who knows?
What time?
7 o'clock, if you are going to be early and active and get a gold star in your notebook. And breakfast is at 8:15, if you want to get a blue mark in your notebook. And the teaching starts here at 9:30 for a yellow mark in the notebook.